Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. The state is ramping up COVID-19 testing again as positive cases and hospitalizations continue to rise due to the Delta variant.
I'm actually, on the other hand, encouraged that people are going to get tested.
However, the number of Hoosiers fully vaccinated against the virus remains just around 50%. The price of beef is soaring, but the extra money isn't going to cattle farmers, and that's causing them to rethink how much livestock they keep on hand.
Our farm, instead of having 200 or 250 cows, we might go back to 180 cows. So we're not producing quite as many calves, and I think it'll balance out.
Cattle farmers are also turning to Washington for help. And an Afghan professor at Indiana University talks about the turmoil in his homeland. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, the state topped 4,000 new positive cases of COVID-19 today, the most in a single day since January 15th. Hospitalizations are also on the rise, and that has those in the healthcare system concerned. Pat Bean reports.
Indiana is ramping up COVID-19 testing sites once again, this after closing them in June, as new daily cases of the virus climbed above 3,500 this week. Hospitalizations, as you'd expect, are also up, more than 4 times as many as July's low of 371. It's one more wave for a weary healthcare system that has been battling COVID for over a year and a half.
Nurses are tired, respiratory therapists, physicians, everyone, our environmental service workers, they've all been working so hard for so long dealing with the pandemic, and that takes a toll.
Tabor is the president of the Indiana Hospital Association. He says he is worried about the availability of ICU beds, especially those for pediatric patients not eligible for the vaccine.
Pediatric intensive care beds are scarce. There aren't a lot of them. And so if we were to see these trends increase, we don't know yet the full impacts of back to school. That is something that we're going to have to monitor very closely.
David Porter is a family medicine doctor in Columbus, and he says he's seeing a lot more sick children from the virus.
I really feel for the parents of kids under 12. Those over 12, they should be encouraging their children to vaccinate. And unfortunately, children don't have that choice to vaccinate themselves.
And until the FDA approves the vaccine for those under 12, wearing a mask is just about the only protection. The vaccine is readily available for everyone over 12, but Porter says the problem is convincing enough people to get it. Barely half of those eligible to get the vaccine in the state have gotten it, although the numbers of first-time shots is on the rise. Still, Indiana ranks around the bottom third in the nation for percentage of population vaccinated. Porter says he continues to see patients hesitant to get the vaccine.
We hear the gamut, various people have concerns about how quickly the vaccine was created, that it's still under emergency status, all the way to, hey, I hear that it's going to turn us all into zombies after a year or two.
Tabor says the numbers don't lie when it comes to the effectiveness of the vaccine, despite breakthrough cases.
98% of the hospitalizations that we're seeing are with unvaccinated patients. So we know that the vaccine is effective and can reduce that strain on the system.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Pat Bean.
As the price of beef continues to soar, many consumers are feeling it in their wallets, but the extra money isn't going where you might think. Brock Turner tells us why some cattle farmers are calling on the government for help in the first of a 2-part series.
It's a routine day for Tim Schwab and his 200 cattle in Batesville. Schwab has been raising cattle all of his life and has a hard time picturing himself doing anything else.
He says you never get too much rain and you never get too many live calves. So this is kind of relaxing for me. I'll come out here in the evening and check cows and mill around through them and, you know, make mating decisions and stuff like that off of what I see and stuff. So that's pretty rewarding.
Schwab sells many of these cattle to 4-H students for shows, but some end up traveling to farms where they'll be prepared for processing.
We'll get them to about 900 pounds before we sell them, and then they go to the feedlot for their finishing ration, and then those guys will take them to about 1,300 pounds.
While the per-pound price of beef has increased more than 25% in the past 2 years, farmers haven't realized those profits. Some experts and farmers argue that's because of the country's processing infrastructure. According to the most recent data from the United States Department of Agriculture, 4 firms, JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef, process nearly 70% of the nation's meat. The United States Department of Justice is currently investigating whether the packers have engaged in price fixing or other illegal measures, but there's no timeline on when the investigation will conclude. Washington has considered regulation, but that's something many ranchers, including Schwab, are hesitant to fully support.
We don't need government in here yet. Now, that might come to that point.
Currently, Schwab receives about $1.35 per pound for each cow he sells, up from the prices of just over $1 per pound he was getting earlier this year. But that's still lower than the $1.40 he was getting before the pandemic. He says to counter that, farmers may begin thinning their herds to decrease the number of cattle on the market.
The cattle farmer will probably, as history has shown us, will probably decrease the size of the cow herd for a while. And, you know, like me, myself, or our farm, you know, instead of having 200 or 250 cows, we might go back to 180 cows. So we're not producing quite as many calves, and I think it'll balance out. You know, and history has shown us that the cow herd inventory goes up and down, and as it goes up and down, the market does respond to it.
The lobbying organization that represents the Big Four packers and others say the industry benefits from and depends on competitive markets. It denies there's any collusion. Packers say the increased demand for beef paired with labor challenges due to COVID-19 have reduced their capacity to process beef. The supply of cattle is starting to decline, according to a recent analysis.
There's plenty of cattle, there's plenty of supply of cattle, and there's a big demand for cattle, but because of the workers not being at the packing plants and they can't run at 100% capacity, there's getting to be a backlog right there.
That backlog is inflating prices for anyone seeking to put a burger or a steak on their plates.
Anecdotally, what I'm told on a day-to-day basis, 40 to 60%. That's a significant price increase.
Tam says some restaurants have chosen to raise their prices, while others are absorbing losses in hopes of attracting more customers.
Restaurants have grappled with that issue and have made some significant decisions. You know, initially, I think a lot of restaurateurs and decision makers were like, look, maybe we can ride this out for 2 weeks. Well, 2 weeks has turned into months.
Grocers say they're paying more for beef, too.
From our perspective, it certainly is not at the supermarket level. So the cost of the product going to the stores is up a significant amount.
Schwab and other cattle farmers say they're naturally optimistic, even if the deck appears to be stacked against them.
I think we need to, you know, kind of come together and figure out why there's such a disparity in the price that they're getting and the price we're getting, you know, and you know, I think there's enough there for everybody to get a little piece of the pie.
But spending time on pasture makes everything worth it.
You know, it's not like going to work every day. It's just going and play with cows every day, you know. So.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Brock Turner.
Next week, we'll have more on how local farmers and processors have carved space to compete against some of the nation's largest processors and groceries. High school students in Indiana are working with a state lawmaker to craft a bill addressing climate change. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports the group formed out of frustration that, despite multiple protests and letters, Indiana lawmakers haven't passed climate legislation.
The group Confront the Climate Crisis aims to unify youth climate activists from around the state into one voice. Students in the group want the state to pass laws to help Indiana achieve carbon neutrality and address environmental racism. But West Lafayette junior-senior high school sophomore Rahul Durai says the first thing they want lawmakers to do is declare climate change an emergency.
It's in our name, confront the climate crisis. Just, acknowledge that this problem is happening and acknowledge it at the scale that it's happening.
The group is working with Republican Senator Ron Alting to craft climate legislation for the 2022 legislative session.
So it's like one ask or just a few asks, so then legislators can understand more what we're trying to say.
They hope to announce more about the bill during a climate march in West Lafayette on September 24th. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
Well, students began arriving in Bloomington this week for the start of the fall semester at Indiana University. Around 11,000 students are expected to move into IU dorms this week. That includes a record freshman class of nearly 9,400. The university received more than 46,000 applications for the fall. IU says it will take a census of students after classes start Monday. State leaders held a roundtable earlier this week to discuss how legislators can expand access to broadband internet. As Brock Turner reports, it's a complicated problem that could be aided by upcoming legislation.
President Joe Biden's roughly $1 trillion infrastructure bill that passed the Senate with bipartisan support is facing some opposition at home. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz wouldn't commit to supporting the bill after a roundtable in Hamilton County where nearly everyone agreed more money was needed to spur investment. However, Spartz says her vote shouldn't indicate her overall support of broadband and other infrastructure investments. While the Republican Congresswoman declined to provide a specific figure she favors, she said her vote would consider specific line items in the cost-benefit analysis of each.
Everything that we're able to invest and pay for, we should be able to invest. But things that we cannot pay for, the things that don't bring long-term value, we might have to deliberate some other time.
A Purdue University study revealed every dollar invested in broadband returned $4 to local economies in Indiana. Current investments show around 1 in 10 Hoosiers lack access to broadband internet. Approximately $65 billion for broadband is included in the Senate proposal. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Brock Turner.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Bloomington saw its population decrease in the census, but the city's mayor says the count is off. And an internet search turns up something mysterious supposedly at and under Lake Monroe. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Year after year, PBS has been bringing you the news you trust.
We care about the things that are going to affect the lives of each and every American.
The in-depth analysis you need.
What we normally see in these big crises.
And the true stories that have to be told.
We're a place that people can come not just to find out what happened, but why it matters.
It's all thanks to the support of viewers like you. Thank you. And stay tuned to America's most trusted network.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. With the rapid collapse of the U.S.-backed Afghanistan government last week and the return to Taliban rule, an IU scholar says he's concerned for the future of his homeland. Holden Abshur has this report.
Nazif Shirani is an anthropology professor at Indiana University who was born and raised in Afghanistan. He says more than 60% of the Afghan population is younger than 25 years old and does not remember the Taliban rule from 1996 to 2001.
These young people are extremely fearful, especially women and young girls who have had education, who have had some skills and liberties and enjoying a lot of those, and they think that they're going to be lost.
The U.S. and other countries are scrambling to evacuate their own citizens and thousands of Afghans who allied with them in the 20-year war against the Taliban. Shirani worries that mass evacuations will contribute to national brain drain.
They're doing maybe favors to individuals who find themselves desperate, but they're also robbing a country, essentially the possibility of having reconstruction of their own countries and becoming self-sufficient.
The U.S. has faced criticism for what became a chaotic exodus after the collapse of the Afghan government. IU Vice President for Engagement Kirk White has been in the Indiana National Guard for 30 years and twice deployed to Afghanistan.
their lives are in peril, and we owe them more than that. And it's a very sad commentary that the United States government did not have a well-executed plan to get these Afghan allies out of the country before the government fell.
Shirani says other nations can help by refusing to acknowledge the Taliban government unless it abides by human rights and is inclusive of the new generation of Afghan youth.
No government in Afghanistan can survive for any length of time without international assistance. And that's something that Taliban understand.
Still, Shirani says it will take almost 20 years for the new government, whether it is Taliban-led or not, to retrain another generation.
And Afghanistan has been the victim of this for 43 years now. Other people have come and fought their wars in the backyard of the Afghans and destroyed their country in more ways than one.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Holden Apsher.
U.S. Census numbers show Bloomington lost about 1,200 residents from its population in the last decade. Mayor John Hamilton says he doesn't think that's accurate.
If we missed 1 out of 300 people in a census count, that could add up to $1 million of loss over 10 years.
Federal funding for grants or programs such as housing and urban development money is based on population. Hamilton thinks the pandemic may have affected the data. He says estimates from the Census Bureau since 2010 show Bloomington was expected to grow by 6,000. We're joined now by Matt Kinghorn, a senior demographic analyst at IU's Kelley School of Business. Hello, Matt, and welcome. As you just heard, the Bloomington mayor says the city was undercounted by thousands due to the pandemic. Did conducting a census while much of the country was on lockdown have an impact on those numbers?
I think that the mayor is right to have some questions about the numbers for here in Bloomington. I think statewide, I think looking that the pandemic didn't really have an impact on numbers for the state. We actually grew more than we expected this past decade according to the census. But here in Bloomington, the numbers were certainly surprising. And I think some other data points that point to that maybe there's some issues where there's a higher vacancy rate, a housing vacancy rate here in Bloomington than we saw, say, 10 years ago, quite a bit higher. And then you could also compare it to, say, maybe Bloomington's peer in the state, which would be West Lafayette, and their numbers were also quite a bit lower than were expected. And West Lafayette also had very high housing vacancy rates. So it certainly can raise the questions that maybe the pandemic really impacted the census count in college communities.
Now, the Constitution mandates a census every 10 years. What are some of the impacts of rising or falling populations on the state?
Well, statewide, the biggest impact is, the reason that we do the census in the first place is to apportion congressional seats. And so, some of our neighbors, Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio, each lost a congressional seat this time around. Luckily, we had enough growth here in Indiana to hold on to our 9 seats. But that's the biggest issue. But it's also just, every 10 years, it's almost akin to going to a doctor's appointment, a doctor's checkup to see, check our vital signs to see whether or not we are growing, whether or not we're attracting residents. And so that's some good inputs the state can find just based on their population trends.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Matt.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Lake Monroe was created out of the Salt Creek Valley in the early 1960s. Thousands were displaced and 2 small towns razed to make room for the reservoir. But an internet search led one listener to ask, what else is at the bottom of Lake Monroe? Pat Bean reports.
Google Lake Monroe and you'll get links to the expected tourist, boat rental, realty properties, and Department of Natural Resources sites. But if you dig down a bit, you can also find a link to something called Site 81. That's what Elizabeth Lynch did.
One of the questions on there was, what is Site 81 under Lake Monroe? So I started doing my Google searches and couldn't find a solid answer.
And that led Lynch to ask, just what is Site 81, and is it really under Lake Monroe? According to an extensive dossier on the SCP Foundation website, Site 81 was created in 1946 as a secret government super site to house and research anomalous activity in the Midwest, and Lake Monroe was built in 1964 by the Army Corps of Engineers as a cover story. At first glance, And second and third glance, it's an eye-opener. The Site 81 page has geolocation maps, images, video, and numerous documents pertaining to the site and looks the part of a secret government research facility. But that's the point, and part of the fun.
It was very easy, especially early on, to miss kind of the red flags about, well, this is fiction. They would just read down the list and they'd be like, oh my God, there's stuff going on out there.
That's Ben Sisson, or DJ Cactus as he goes by on the site, and he's the author of the Site 81 file. He grew up in Plainfield and began attending Indiana University in 2012. That's where he discovered the SCP Foundation community on Wikipedia. The SCP stands for Secure, Contain, and Protect, and the Foundation oversees the various secret sites scattered around the world.
Go check out the SCP Wiki. Go in with an open mind. There's a lot to get into there. You can really get lost. I mean, there are probably 100,000 pages on that website now, if not more, written by all kinds of different people from all kinds of different backgrounds.
Sisson came up with the idea for locating Site 81 at Lake Monroe during his numerous trips between Bloomington and Bedford for work. He often took the causeway route across the lake, so the wastewater treatment plant at the lake became an obvious choice for the headquarters of a secret government agency. The real buildings were relabeled, and 7 subterranean wings under the lake were envisioned.
Who goes to a water treatment plant except the people who work there? And so you would never think about the people going in and out of it, even if they were bringing in big trucks full of, relics and deific entities and all sorts of stuff.
And the history of the lake was the perfect cover story.
It wasn't always a lake, it's a reservoir. So at some point it had to have been dug out. Why not just build a building under there first and then, flood it?
Sisson now lives in Atlanta, but much of his writing is set in his home state of Indiana, setting his stories in places around Bloomington and French Lick, where he would visit his grandparents, and his hometown of Plainfield adds realism to the fiction and confusion.
Somebody came into the chat one time there on the site and said, hey, I know where this place is. I'm going to go check it out. And I had to be very clear, like, hey, there's nothing there. Take my word for it. The people who live there are lovely. They probably would not love it if you just showed up unannounced.
So what's really under Lake Monroe? Much of the almost 11,000 acres the lake sits on were farmlands in what was known as the Salt Creek Valley. But more than 300 homes, 3 schools, 10 churches, 8 cemeteries, and the county's last 3 covered bridges were either relocated or razed. In all, nearly 3,500 people were displaced, and the towns of Paintown and Elkinsville leveled for the building of the reservoir. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Pat Bean.
Construction on the lake began in 1960 and was completed in 1965 at a cost of $16.5 million. Lake Monroe remains the primary water source for Bloomington. Murals have become a familiar part of the Bloomington scene in recent years, including a Black Lives mural dedicated on IU's campus Thursday evening. But one mural downtown has been painted over. Holden Ebsher has the story.
Since 1996, the Bicycle Garage's wall facing People's Park has been a canvas for rotating murals. The Rhinos Youth Center led the partnership until it closed in 2019. Its final commission was to local artist Eva Allen, who unveiled her You Belong Here mural in the fall of 2017. Her contract lasted until August 2020. However, the mural was painted over on June 19, 2020, or Juneteenth, to say Black Lives Matter in pink letters.
The secondary painting over top of her mural came at a time when that 3-year period was almost up. So the idea was that there was going to be another commission.
Cassander says the city is in communication with the Bicycle Garage to commission a new mural for the space in People's Park, but she is unsure of a timeline for the project. Sean Starowitz, assistant director for the arts in Bloomington, says the Board of Art Commission is looking to honor the park's complicated history. In 1968, a black-owned business, the Black Market, was firebombed by several members of the Ku Klux Klan. The store never rebuilt, and the space was dedicated as a park later in 1976.
I think the intention from the Art Commission would be that the future commission would go to an artist of color.
Starowitz says public art has changed in the last year. After the summer of 2020, it has become inherently political.
Public art has shifted into this, it's always been political, right? But the role of public art has kind of cemented itself in politics in a different way.
The murals in People's Park and on 6th Street and Elm Street are not the only ones in town. Indiana University students installed a colorful and intricate Black Lives Matter mural in front of the Neil Marshall Black Cultural Center in July. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Holden Apsher.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.